Okay, we're continuing in Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. Louis Pasteur, he lived from 1822 to 1895. His first quote, "Chance favors the prepared mind. Posterity will one day laugh at the foolishness of the materialistic philosophers, the atheists. The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the work of the Creator. Science brings men nearer to God. Let me tell you the secret that has led me to my goal. My strength lies solely in my tenacity." Okay, that sounds kind of like Edison, being real tenacious, rather than Nikola Tesla being real smart. Okay, Louis Pasteur continues, "I pray while I am engaged in my work in the laboratory." Okay, I know there's a whole lot more to Louis Pasteur. I'm just going to leave it at that. One quote by Claude Bernard, "The microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything." Okay, there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff in that, but we're not going to get into that today. Just a couple quotes to be aware of them. There's a whole bunch of interesting things about them. Okay, the next guy is General Patton. And General Patton was like this big hero when I was growing up. When I was growing up, everybody looked forward to the big Patton movie with George C. Scott. Came out, about once a year we'd see it on TV. We all loved the movie, and it was real macho, rough and tough. And there was the attitude back in those days when I was a young guy. USA was up here. The rest of the world, compared to USA, was a bunch of third world crap holes, okay? Europe, had its time, but now it was past. It was the American century, and, everybody just wanted to be American. My parents, my mom was from Puerto Rico, but it's like, why do you want to learn Spanish? You live in America. You're lucky to live in America. Spanish doesn't really matter anymore. Then she regretted it and tried to teach us later, but once we could, say no and stuff, we just refused to learn it, okay? But we just had this attitude. America, great. Everything else, is SHIT compared to America. And that was actually a good attitude. We also had the attitude, we're a melting pot. You're an American. There was none of this African American or hyphenated American BS. You were an American. That's it. I didn't say I was an Irish American or Puerto Rican American. I was an American, okay? America was up here. Ireland and Puerto Rico were down there. Same for every other country, There was ethnic groups, but we all considered ourselves America. Back then, there was a Polish neighborhood. There was a Lithuanian neighborhood. There was a bit of an Irish neighborhood. And actually, I think that was a good thing, but that all got kind of destroyed. Anyways, let's do about Patton. I think he probably did get bumped off. I don't think it was by accident. A good biography to start with him is the O'Reilly biography. The O'Reilly books tend to be good. They're like written by some historian with a little bit of influence by O'Reilly, the news guy. But they're entertaining. He's good at making things entertaining. He was buried in Luxembourg. They didn't allow him to be buried in Arlington Cemetery, according to Rufus Fears, the great historian. His high school test scores were so poor he couldn't get into West Point, apparently. He did get into VML, Virginia, I think, Military Institute. He competed for USA in Olympics in the pentathlon. He did get along with Eisenhower. He was a much better general than Eisenhower, okay? The newspapers didn't like him, and FDR did not like him. In his opinion, FDR was too soft on the commies, and a lot of people, like from Eastern Europe, were pissed off. They think that FDR basically gave Eastern Europe to Stalin. Now, I don't want to get into all the World War II history because that could go on and on forever, but they felt betrayed by him, sort of like, part of what we went into World War II was also to protect, places like Poland, and Eastern Europe got screwed by World War II. That's a fact. Okay, the movie Rufus Fears, a professor said, was very much like his life. The movie with George C. Scott was great. Okay, and he was really arrogant, over the top, ostentatious, dandy, and all that stuff. But we kind of liked it. That was kind of like the attitude of America back in those days. So Montgomery was the big leader of the British Army. And here'd be like a typical comment that we would all think was normal. Coming from Patton with regard to Montgomery. He said, "I can outfight that little fart Monty anytime." And then never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. Moral courage is the most valuable and usually the most absent characteristic in men. Do your damnedest in the most ostentatious manner all the time. Yeah, America kind of took pride in being the best and standing out and being, you had to earn it, but that's how it was. we're Americans. We're the best. That was the attitude. That was good. And all the TV was, Father Knows Best, Charles Bronson, Charlton Heston, Rocky, Sylvester Stallone, Chuck Connors. America was macho. John Wayne. It was great growing up in that America. Nowadays, America's all pussified. It's like, in my high school, there was like 1,500 kids in each grade, something like that. A lot, over 1,000. And I wasn't aware of a single homosexual in the whole school. I never heard of such a thing as transsexual. All of this stuff just came around late, like in the 1990s or something. And then, they put estrogenic chemicals in everything, in the water and in the food. And all of a sudden, it's like all this LGBTQ, trans, all this stuff. I never heard of any of this stuff when I was growing up. This is all new. This was not around when I was a young guy. Now, there probably might have been somebody who was a homosexual. I heard of a homosexual like when I went to college, that somebody was gay. Okay, but I never heard of such a thing when I was young. So I'm just letting you know, this was all a new thing. America really became feminized, and I also think this is all part of, and women got more and more power in an inappropriate way. That the whole country was so feminized, and I think that was all part of preparing America to be destroyed and to collapse, okay? Not the old school way of America. Like there was a giant shift when I went from high school where football and wrestling were where it was at. They were the cool, tough, macho sports. And then all of a sudden I go to college at Stanford and it's like there's letters to the newspaper that they believe that all the scholarships should be taken away from football players and wrestlers because they're such macho, violent sports, and that they're just really thuggery and they're really nothing to be proud of, and the school should like disown them or something. I'm like, what the hell is this? Okay, not a good place to be a wrestler. Anyways, that's sort of part of the historical change in America. They want, because there's no such thing as a gynocracy in the real world. So feminizing the country is part of making it willing to collapse, destroying the art with the fake art museums, all that stuff. It's like this giant concerted effort of all these little things put together to destroy the machismo of America that was normal when I was young. There were guys like Gordon Liddy, okay, was a typical guy. I would see his books or see him talking. He was like a well-known figure when I was a young guy, okay, and nowadays it's all feminized. You got all these Hollywood, you almost have to be gay to get a leading role as a Hollywood star if you're a white male nowadays, okay? It's not how it used to be. Okay. Okay, now here's what Patton says. When I want my men to remember something important and really make it stick, I give it to them double dirty. It may not sound nice to a bunch of little old ladies in an afternoon tea party, but it helps. You can't run an army without profanity, and it has to be eloquent profanity. You are not beaten until you admit it, so don't. Always do more than is required of you. So anyways, there's a ton of interesting things about Patton. If you want to entertain yourself about history, read his quotes. You'll be surprised if you haven't read them already and if you don't know his history. And there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff. That's a good enough introduction to him. Watch the movie about him if you're curious. It's a great movie with George C. Scott. So that's it for today. Hope you found that helpful.